Prince Peter. We will not win this war through attrition. Too many other warlords have tried and failed with the strategy of exhaustion. A subtler strategy will win this war, and one day the sunburst will fly over a united league. Prince Peter Davion, quoted from the New Davions, Politics over PPCS, by Duke Reginald Timmins, Avalon Press, 2955. The explosion that had shattered Prince Joseph's battlemaster had left him in a state of permanent injury. His internal organs had been badly damaged, either by the explosion or because of the radiation that leaked from his damaged mech. He could spend the remainder of his life hooked up to medical life support systems, or else die. To a man who enjoyed the thrill of battle and the air of alien worlds, the thought of a life chained to a machine was unbearable. Though he hoped to find solace in the political side of government, that had never been his pleasure or his inclination. For a warrior like him, what could compare to leading a charge of BattleMech or to watching a vanquished enemy come forward, white flag in hand? In 2931, Prince Joseph II abdicated in favor of his son Peter. Though his body's growing deterioration prevented him from participating in the government, he lived another 4 years after his abdication, which was long enough to see his son's new style of leadership. When he died, it was the end of an era. During the time of Joseph and his father, the Davions were more concerned with battle than with statesmanship. In many ways, it was a simpler, more direct age. With the accession of Peter Davion to the princehood, things would begin to change. Though as much a military man as his father, Prince Peter understood the desperate need for a strong government that did not try to settle every dispute through war. He saw that he must learn to take a longer view of Federation affairs. Realizing that the responsibilities of government were a challenge equal to anything the battlefield had to offer, Peter began to relish the job, and rarely participated in combat during his reign. Indeed, he even made so bold as to declare in his first public address that he intended to restore the Davion government to its former heights. Though the days of the infamous brotherhoods were over, land-holding Mechwarriors were still strong enough to resist reforms from above. Paul's creation of a feudal nobility more than a century before was coming back to haunt his heirs. In Paul's day, the warrior aristocracy had owed everything to their prince, but the hereditary descendants of those warriors owed House Davion very little. If displeased with one of these warrior aristocrats, Peter could not simply remove the noble family from their lands and titles without sparking a full-scale revolt. Resorting to legal trickery to siphon off power from the warrior nobles would have been just as risky. Prince Peter feared that these warrior nobles would realize their political strength and try to become kingmakers within the Federation. As the head of House Davion, he was not about to allow that to happen. The situation was inherently unstable, and Peter would devote most of his reign to seeking a solution. While the war continued along the frontiers, Peter reformed the government where he could, and found ways to placate the nobility when reforms frightened them. Knowing that he could not directly attack the power of the Mechwarrior aristocrats, he attempted to raise another faction of his own as a bulwark against the warrior nobles' intervention in government. Peter was only partially successful, and it would ultimately cost him his life. Knights of the Void. I've always found fighting in an aerospace fighter much more honest than fighting in a mech. In a fighter, you maneuver through space, cutting and slicing at your opponent any way you can. And if your fighter should get hit, you tumble straight into the black void. To me, that has always been much closer to the truth than a mech fight. General Sylvia Nathan, quoted in The Side of the PPC, by Duchess Frederica Davion, at Express, 3021. During his rule, Prince Peter Davion lavished enormous sums, special military honors, and patents of nobility on members of the Federated Suns aerospace fighter arm. The Knights of the Void soon became his special favorite among the armed services, and he never ceased to promote loyalty and a high esprit de corps among their ranks. Peter's special concern for his fighter pilots coincided with Chancellor Ingrid Legau's new offensive strategy for her armed forces. To bolster her ground forces, she had begun to use large groups of aerospace fighters. In 2952, the new strategy paid off when her fighters intercepted a raid by House Mechwarrior. Greatly encouraged, Chancellor Ingrid decided to launch a major offensive composed of almost 300 aerospace fighters against the Davion world of Lee. After the Davion military intelligence and the Mayo learned of her intentions, Prince Peter moved to reinforce the world. For the first time in years, Peter Davion entered a battle to direct the planet defense. In a 3-day battle on and around Lee, the Davion defenders crushed the Capellan attack. In the air, the Earth's aerospace fighters crippled the Capellan airstrike force, and succeeded in knocking out 40 of them. This left the Capellan mechs, tanks, and infantry on the ground without the full weight of the massive air support they needed. At that point, Prince Peter led his Davion mechs in an attack that easily pushed the Capellans off Lee, with heavy casualties. The Capellans had lost so many fighters in the Great Lee Turkey Shoot, as the battle came to be known, that it took them years to regain their former strength. Though he had spent the entire battle slugging it out among the rest of the Mechwarriors, Prince Peter especially praised the aerospace pilots, whom he credited with the victory. Not even the dimmest Mechwarrior could miss seeing which way the wind was blowing. Not long after the Great Lee Turkey Shoot, the Warriors' Cabal was formed. Heroes old and new. The Mechwarrior, mighty in his towering suit of mechanical armor, has been but one focus of romantic idealism in the inner sphere. In other times, other warriors also embodied the virtues of honor, honesty, and goodness. During the Star League era, for example, it was the common trooper of the regular army who captured the popular imagination. Later, naval officers, tank commanders, and even VTOL pilots also had their day as heroes of the public's fantasies. When the image of the Mechwarrior began to capture people's hearts and minds, it was usually because of the exploits of certain elite units such as the Sword of Light regiments in the Draconis Combine or the Royal Brigade of Guards in the Federated Suns. Not surprisingly, in the dark days when Mechwarriors were either stealing from the public or trying to manipulate the Davion government during Prince Joseph's reign, the aerospace fighter pilot was considered the upholder of honor and truth. This became even more so when Prince Peter Davion ennobled the Knights of the Void. From Romanticism in Common Culture, by Rebecca Greenberg, New Curtis Press, 2999. The Mechwarrior Elite. The death of Prince Peter is, by contemporary standards, a recent event. Several noted socio-political theorists have advanced the theory that the events leading up to it could arise again in the coming years. Official Davion propaganda claims that the so-called Cabal was a conspiracy of a few disgruntled warriors who resented Prince Peter's efforts to curtail their power. That is certainly part of the story, but probably only the tip of the iceberg. The prominent sociologist Lyran drew numerous comparisons between post-Star League society and the deteriorating conditions of Imperial Rome during the so-called Age of 30 Tyrants. Like Rome in that era, today's successor states are held together by the personal authority of warlords who maintain their power so long as they can maintain the support and loyalty of their armies. As the Romans learned only too well, an army with that much political power rarely hesitates to use it when and if its best interests demand it. There are, of course, points of divergence between the Roman model and our present society. The Mechwarriors involved in the Cabal are more similar to the powerful landowning barons and knights of medieval England and France than to the leaders of Rome's legions. It is true, however, that the breakdown of Roman government was directly linked to the increasing autonomy of ambitious field commanders. Once the Roman dynastic succession was broken, anyone of reasonably noble birth became eligible for the throne. During the age of the 30 tyrants, a number of comparatively low-born soldiers took the purple simply because they had distinguished themselves as loyal soldiers. This parallels the situation that Peter Davion faced. By virtue of their training and ownership of increasingly scarce BattleMechs, Mechwarriors are vital to the survival of the Successor States. Modern warfare has demonstrated that mechs are essential to victory, no matter what infantry and armor enthusiasts claim to the contrary. Warlords cannot wage war without Mechwarriors, and so they grant them lands, titles, and political power to win their loyalty. Bestowing such power on often combative and ambitious men and women makes it that much more likely that those Mechwarriors will fail in their loyalty if forced to choose between their lord and themselves. In such a situation, the warrior will attempt either to influence a lord's policies or to replace him with someone else. Prince Peter's solution was to create another powerful group to offset the power of the Mechwarriors. Though the faction helped Prince Andrew defeat the disorganized Kabbalists, this solution triggered the very crisis it was to prevent. Moreover, the two factions may find enough common ground to cooperate against the government, or one faction may find it convenient not to intervene at a moment of crisis, leaving the prince high and dry. In the past decade, Prince Hanse Davion has initiated another solution. The creation of the new Avalon Institute of Science suggests the possibility of reform through the conversion of an essentially feudal army into a professional one. Warriors molded by institutions and holding allegiance to the state rather than to personal overlords should ultimately become the backbone of a new kind of fighting force. Similar academies exist in other successor states as well, and so the trend is likely to take hold everywhere. A similar transition from feudalism to nationalism also revolutionized Europe and led to the fall of the hereditary monarchies. If similar changes occur in our own society, what will happen to the successor lords? Will the restoration of the Star League become as foolish a concept as the revival of the Roman Empire in the face of clear-cut national and linguistic boundaries? Would the most talented successor warlord be any more successful in uniting a formerly feudal inner sphere than Napoleon was in uniting post-feudal Europe? From the Inner Sphere and the Modern Feudalistic State, by Natalie Wessick, Mugent Press, 3022. Have it your way. One of the strangest mutinies in history occurred in 2970, when mercenaries from Beaufort's Cossacks went on a shooting spree in a suburb of New Defiance City on the planet Moravian. A clause in the unit's contract specified that twice a week the government would pay for a free meal for all members of the unit at a local F restaurant, the most popular chain in the Federated Suns. The fact that Capellan naval forces blockaded Moravian shortly after the unit's arrival should not have made any difference, as Moravian produced its own wheat, beef, corn, sugar, milk, and potatoes. The only off-world elements of F cuisine were pickles, sesame seeds, and whale meat. Nevertheless, when the troops could not get exactly what they ordered, Colonel Regnews accused F of defaulting on the unit's food supply contract. The manager of the outlet, afraid of losing the most lucrative contract he had ever had, was quick to point out that the blockade had prevented supplies from arriving. He went on to say that he had in good faith fulfilled the contract as best he could, and that even if he could have anticipated the blockade, he did not have facilities to refrigerate a whale. Upon hearing this, the Cossacks, against orders from Colonel Regnews, went on a rampage, commandeering civilian motor vehicles, screaming out the windows at the natives, and discharging their weapons. They stormed the F franchise, chanting, "Where's the pickle? Where's the lettuce?" Their chant made no sense, as F had never used lettuce in any of its products. Perhaps the troops were confusing the eatery with a similar, competing chain. The manager and staff, frightened by the outburst, fled the restaurant. After a few minutes more of chanting, the troops began to feel foolish and left. Colonel Regnews took no disciplinary action. He remarked to one of his aides, We've got to get these soldiers into a real fight. When they start letting off steam like this, the cutting edge is definitely off the rose. Despite all the commotion and the shooting, not a single civilian was hurt during the soldiers' outburst. From A Child's History of Mutinies, by Henriette Cabriel, Subversive Press, 3021. The Cabal. Prince Peter had entered the Battle of Lee mainly to boost his military prestige so that he could continue his reforms. In the wake of that victory, he pushed for further attacks on the Capellans to maintain pressure against House Davion to keep his warriors preoccupied. Because of the glowing performance of the Davion aerospace pilots at Lee, Prince Peter believed that he could now accelerate his plans to be rid of certain Mechwarriors who had consistently opposed his reforms. In a purge that some likened to a bureaucratic lynching, Mechwarriors who had spoken against the prince suddenly found themselves cashiered out of the office as well as stripped of their lands, money, and mechs. As the purge gained speed, the warriors' cabal collected more and more members who feared for their existence as Mechwarriors. Though Prince Peter's advisors urged him to move more cautiously, the prince believed that the high stature now enjoyed by his aerospace pilots would protect him. In 2961, the prince had gone to the Draconis front to tour the newly conquered world of Breed. Though he was ostensibly there to tour the planet's reconstruction efforts, the prince had actually come to Breed to personally dismiss 3 dissident officers. One of these, Colonel Geoffrey Dempsey, had threatened the prince's life if he dared to strip him of his rank and honor. As Prince Peter's entourage approached Colonel Dempsey's headquarters, Dempsey made good his threat. 5 mechs burst from the forest to either side of the base and opened fire on the prince's vehicle. The prince was killed instantly. Though Colonel Dempsey and his conspirators were immediately arrested, the other members of the cabal agitated for their release. The dissidents had managed to win so much sympathy for their cause on Breed that the prince turned the capital city into an armed fortress to keep the people of Breed or the other cabalist officers from liberating the colonel from his keep. The one error in Colonel Dempsey's calculations was that he did not foresee what effect Prince Peter's death would have on his son Andrew. A major in the Royal Brigade and a well-respected Mechwarrior, it was Andrew who announced the news of his father's assassination to the Federated Suns, displaying such grief and yet so much dignity that the cabal's hopes of winning public support were dashed. The fact that Prince Peter had a son to avenge his death convinced many other Mechwarriors to stay away from joining the cabal. Instead of a civil war in the Federated Suns, a small mutiny broke out in the Draconis March, where the cabal had been the strongest. When 5 mech regiments refused to take the customary oath of fealty to the new first prince, Andrew gathered up the Royal Brigade and a large aerospace force for a short and savage campaign to wipe out the rebellion. Fortunately for the Suns, the Draconis' combine economy had fallen on hard times, and so the Caritans were in a poor position to exploit the chaos in the Draconis March. Prince Andrew attacked so swiftly that the mutineers had neither time to flee nor to receive aid. In the course of a campaign that culminated in the destruction of the Second Avalon borderers on Cheer, all the rebellious Mechwarriors had either surrendered or been killed in combat. Regrouping. The mutiny of the Cabalists and the murder of Prince Peter were evils that did result in some good. Because the malcontents in the army were exposed, Prince Andrew was able to strip them of their powers and their holdings. The vast majority of UF's units remained loyal to the Davions during the mutiny and were later eager to prove that loyalty by accepting the military reforms that had cost Prince Peter his life. Andrew also helped things along by sugarcoating the major reforms in showy honors and larger retirement and benefit plans. Though this caused the Federated Suns some economic hardship, it was worth it to bolster the loyalty of the army and to encourage longer terms of service. During Prince Peter's reign, there had been times of near quiet along both marches. As news of the Mechwarrior cabal leaked out, however, both the Draconis and the Capellan commanders hoped to take advantage of House Davion's misfortunes by escalating the war along both fronts. Though both realms were too late to capitalize much on the unrest within the Federated Suns, they nevertheless persevered in their attacks. Facing attacks on both fronts, Tax Theofson prevented Prince Andrew from launching counterattacks, even though the Capellan offensive was sporadic and inept. Forced into a defensive stance, UF's marshals used the tactic of brief skirmishes and raids to harass enemy buildups. The new prince found it necessary to balance resources and strategies to avoid giving either one of his foes an opening. Time and again, he demonstrated his skill in deploying his meager forces, particularly at Lee, Rio, and Kazai. Border worlds continued to change hands regularly on both fronts, but on the whole, Prince Andrew proved that he was fully capable of holding his own in the succession wars. When House Liao completed the 10-year reorganization of its aerospace force in 2992, the marshals of the Federated Suns realized that they had lost another chance to defeat House Liao. With the Liao fighters better organized and better trained than ever before, they could easily hold their own against Davion pilots, as UF's losses on St. Andre in 2992 proved. In 2999, Andrew Davion died of natural causes, leaving behind 3 children. The eldest was Marie Davion Street. Claire, the illegitimate daughter of Andrew and his mistress, Simone St. Clair. Marie would later become the focal point for a dynastic crisis, despite the fact that she had been specifically excluded from the succession. Andrew's 2 sons, Ian and Hanse, were the children of the prince's official marriage to Jennifer Campbell. At the moment of Prince Andrew's death, the Federated Suns was poised on the thin edge between success and collapse. It would fall to these 2 sons, who would one day be known as the Hound and the Fox, to steer the realm through the most critical phase of the post-League era. The Hound. They call our new prince the Hound, and I must say that the label is not far from the mark. He has the kind of expression you might associate with a faithful old hunting dog, with those large, sad eyes and a nose just a little too big for his face. Of course, the real source of that nickname is his character. Lane Davion has the tenacity and determination of a bloodhound on the trail, and I don't think he'd give up an idea if all the mechs from here to Lutein stood in his way. From the diary of Naomi Gavin Rawlings, Countess of Tritani Valley, Galax, 4 September 2999. Prince Ian Davion took up the leadership of the Federated Suns in mid-2999. Though only 19 years old, Ian had already received extensive training as a warrior, but had not yet undergone training for the complexities of statecraft. Neither did he have any great interest in that. Everyone in the court of New Avalon had long since discovered that fate had played House Davion a fickle hand by making the pugnacious Ian the elder, and the wiser, more level-headed Hanse the younger of the family. Of course, Prince Andrew was not bound to select his eldest son as heir, but several factors conspired to make it necessary. Foremost among these was the attitude of the army, which preferred a trained Mechwarrior on the throne over a youngster who had not yet seen combat. In addition, Hanse was little more than a boy, which was the last thing the realm needed at its helm. On his deathbed, Andrew confirmed the selection of Ian as Prince Imperial. Even then, many court advisors already recognized Hanse Davion's potential, and they urged Ian to groom him for a greater role than that of commanding marshal of the UFs, as their father had wished. Luckily for the future of the Federated Suns, Ian was more than happy to take the advice. In many ways, Ian resembled Prince Joseph II. He was happiest when leading soldiers and mechs into battle, and preferred to leave the problems of politics to others. Nor did he appreciate being told what to do, and so he often disregarded the experience, abilities, and suggestions of others when it came to the issues of government. Before long, the realm began to suffer. Luckily, there were plenty of battles to occupy Ian, and so direction of the government passed into the hands of a small group of talented men. One of these was Benjamin Sandoval, Duke of Robinson and the leader of the Draconis March. Duke Sandoval's talents were matched by long experience. As good as he was, however, he lacked one major qualification for the exercise of authority in the prince's absence. He was not a blood relative of the Davion family, who would always hesitate considerably before giving any non-Davion too much power. The other two notable political figures of Hanse's reign were George and Michael Hanse. George Hanse was Duke of New Syrtis and hence had authority similar to Duke Sandoval's. His son Michael married Marie Davion, the illegitimate daughter of Prince Andrew, in 3003. This gave Michael the family connection that the other two lacked, and the weak-willed Marie was soon under the spell of her clever, ambitious husband. Rise of Hanse Davion. Decline? Why must it be a decline? Couldn't it be that the Capellans have improved their fighting skills? Why blame our soldiers for a supposed decline in their skills? Why blame me? Duke Michael Hanse Davion, from official court transcripts, 10 September 3005. Michael Hanse, who took the name Hanse Davion after the marriage, was even more clever than either his father or Duke Sandoval. By the time he was 27, his influence was already as great as theirs. From 3005 through 3013, Michael Hanse Davion held considerable authority in political and diplomatic operations, leading 3 separate ministries while at the zenith of his power. Hanse Davion was both ambitious and unscrupulous, however, and his methods offended those who believed in ethics in government. One of these was Hanse Davion, who disliked Michael from the first time they met. Hanse was kept busy with training, however. When he was given a military command on the Draconis March in 3007, those duties removed him as a major factor in court politics for the rest of Ian's reign. It was during Hanse Davion's period of political authority that House Davion managed to lure Wolf's dragoons out of Federated Suns' employ. This was probably not Hanse Davion's intention, but it is symptomatic of how his misuse of authority was taking its toll. At that time, he had been encouraging minions at various levels of the administration to divert funds and supplies to nobles from whom he was seeking favors. The dragoons must have felt such diversion of supplies and funds keenly, and it would have contributed to their desire to move on. Indeed, this kind of corruption within House Davion's administrative ranks led to a general decline in military prowess, despite the efforts of Prince Ian, who did everything but fight battles single-handedly. The deterioration was particularly evident on the Capellan front. In 3001, the Mechwarrior House regiments Lucane and Lumara routed the 7th Crucice Lancers off Lincoln. Then, in 3003, the Jury Regiment pounced upon the Dry River Devils, a Davion mercenary regiment, as they attempted to invade Zama. Because of a snarl in logistics, reinforcements meant to back up the Devils were delayed, and the mercenaries were forced to surrender and turn over their mechs to the victorious Mechwarrior House. Though there were many reasons for the Fasa's poor performance, much of the blame goes to Duke Hanse and his son. To counter the growing tide of ill feeling against the Hanses, Michael orchestrated a subtle propaganda campaign to encourage the people of the Capellan March to question their loyalty to the Davions. Hanse Davion had to be very careful, however. The fact that he was not Duke of New Syrtis hindered his efforts, as all of Michael's aspirations depended on his father's goodwill. George Hanse would never have encouraged or supported outright rebellion as a tool for seizing power. Michael therefore carried out his plans behind closed doors, and ensured that Prince Ian had no cause to investigate what was going on in New Avalon. Supplies and support continued to flow smoothly into the Draconis March, where the prince and his brother were busy fighting the Curatans. Hanse Davion's efforts to keep his brothers-in-law militarily supplied served to enhance their military reputations and to ensure continued successes for the Fs. In 3002, Davion troops led by Prince Ian routed a numerically superior Curata force, which included a Sword of Light regiment, during the Third Battle for Harrow's Son. Other victories, such as the seizure of Selene II and the expulsion of Kurita forces off Illyria and Chla, helped stabilize the border for the Federated Suns. Compared to the marshals in charge on the Capellan front, the Davions seemed invincible. That would prove useful when the crisis finally came. Michael's treachery. I've no delusions about my brother-in-law. If my brother was known as the Hound, and I'm the Fox, then the Duke of New Syrtis is the weasel darting through the underbrush, looking to take advantage. From the private journals of Hanse Davion, 3013. In 3012, the situation in the Capellan March finally became serious enough to make the first prince take notice. Though recent Capellan attacks were small, they had been successful against larger and supposedly superior Davion forces. The Mechwarrior, the Capellan equivalent of the Mayo, was increasing terrorist activities on border worlds, blowing up munitions plants, hospitals, and other vital facilities. Thoroughly occupied in the Draconis March, Prince Ian sent Hanse Davion to take command of the Capellan March. Before long, Hanse discovered just how deeply the rot of confusion and corruption had set in there. Enraged, he set out to discover who was responsible for the military's pitiful state. The effort would be as difficult as any military operation he had ever undertaken. Michael Hanse Davion began to prepare for the confrontation that must surely come when Hanse's investigation inevitably led to him. He won a slight reprieve, however, when the Capellans launched a new offensive. Hanse had to drop his inquiries in order to rally the dispirited Uf's troops into finding the guts to fight the Capellans. His efforts soon bore fruit. At the Battle of Right, Hanse's revitalized troops utterly smashed the Lyran offensive. One Capellan unit, the Lafarge Hussars, was virtually wiped out during the fight. This victory and Hanse's cleaned-up military bureaucracy helped give the Ufs enough spirit to embark on a front-wide offensive. Hanse's efforts in the Capellan March enhanced his reputation back at New Avalon, but the whole affair had left a bitter taste in his mouth. The need to weed out the corruption that had threatened the Ufs in the Capellan March became his overriding concern. Though there was little hard evidence, the Prince Imperial had plenty of clues about where he should be looking. The next year, both Duke George Hanse and Prince Ian Davion died. The Duke's peaceful death at his home on New Syrtis gave the duchy to his son, who now had full control over his own affairs. The first prince died on Mechwarrier's world, fighting the Draconis Combine to the last. Prince Ian had neither wife nor children, which left Hanse Davion as the heir apparent. The new Duke of New Syrtis had his own plans about who should be Prince of the Federated Suns. It has never been proved that Duke Michael hired the assassin who made an attempt on the Prince Imperial when his entourage stopped at Emerson for rest and resupply before heading to New Avalon. A sniper with a laser rifle shot at Hanse just as he was leaving the ramp of his personal dropship. The shot missed, and the prince's bodyguards whisked their charge back inside the ship before the sniper could get off another shot. The sniper killed himself before he could be captured, and his corpse offered no clues. Though the official investigation remained inconclusive, Hanse Davion had no doubt that Duke Hanse Davion was connected to the sniper. This failure left Duke Hanse Davion with only two choices: open rebellion or the acceptance of defeat. He chose the latter, but began to fortify his position as the prince's investigation came ever closer to the source of the recent conspiracies. The Fox. Can it be a coincidence that leaders who are able to see the value of diplomacy, and even of alliances, should arise in all five realms simultaneously? From the Resurgence of Diplomacy, by Professor Randolph Nelson, New Avalon Institute Press, 3024. During the past decade, the Federated Suns has taken the first definite steps toward ending the long stalemate of the succession wars. Under the rule of Hanse Davion, the Federation has enjoyed more social, economic, technical, and military recovery than in the 2 centuries before him. Even enemies of House Davion have been forced to label this period a renaissance of Federated Suns culture. The past decade has also been critical for the whole inner sphere, which now stands on the brink of either peace or another round of bloody warfare. Political blooding. His Highness, the first Prince, is a man to be reckoned with. Under his brother, we saw much of war and were often victorious, but I think we can look forward to far greater success now. The current Davion is not just a ruler but a leader. Someone who knows what he wants and how to get it without compromising his position, his popularity, or his honor. That's rare these days, but he's not called the Fox for nothing. From a letter by Vanessa Sandoval, Countess of the Pearl Islands, to His Grace, the Duke of Robinson, 3013. Hanse Davion became the first Prince of the Federated Suns in 3013. The attempt on his life made the new prince more determined than ever to tighten his grip on the administration and to safeguard his position. He also pushed forward the investigations into the corruption in the Capellan March, hoping that his people would uncover conclusive proof that Duke Hanse Davion was behind it. Though Hanse ordered them to spare no expense, the investigations have never uncovered a shred of proof linking Duke Michael to either the assassination plot or to the malfeasance that he practiced for so long in the March. The Duke of New Certis is a careful man and a talented schemer, who apparently knows how to cover his trail. Prince Hanse could not take action against the Duke on the basis of mere suspicion, for the Hanse family is very popular in the Capellan March and also has a number of influential friends at the New Avalon court. A too precipitate action against him could have done irreparable harm to the unity of the Federation, which was the one thing that Prince Hanse was not willing to risk. All his reforms would be for naught if he inadvertently set off a civil war. The one action Hanse could take had to do with the choice of his ministers and advisers. No one was surprised when the prince removed Hanse Davion's name from the roll of Federation government officials in the new prince's honors list. Everyone at court was aware of the ill feeling that had characterized the two men's relations from the first day. Outwardly, of course, they treated one another courteously, with many expressions of brotherly devotion. In the celebration of Hanse's investiture, Michael vowed to loyally serve the realm by personally directing affairs in the Capellan March. Under frozen smiles and friendly gestures, each was testing his opponent's potential as an enemy, probing for signs of weakness. Formation of the Nays. In late 3012, Princey and Davion received word that the Culletons were building huge storage depots on the planet of Halstead Station. If completed, the storage center would vastly speed up resupply for the DCMS, making life tougher for the Federated Suns. Prince and had decided to keep that storage center from being built, and had immediately begun to make plans for a strike against that world. When Princey died, it fell to Prince Hanse to continue the plans for an attack on Halstead Station. In this same period, the Mechwarrior was reporting that combined construction crews had stumbled upon the ruins of a Star League-era university housing a huge, unopened vault. Realizing how important the contents of that vault might be, Hanse rushed ahead with the raid plans and decided to personally lead the attack. What the prince had thought would be an in-and-out affair turned into a month-long battle. Luck was with the young prince, however. He and his troops managed not only to destroy the Culleton supply center on Halstead Station, but to seize the Halstead collection, perhaps the most important Star League treasure yet discovered. When Prince Davion's mechs broke into the vault, he and his men found rows upon rows of books and computer memory cubes. Hanse and his troops carried off as many of the books as time would permit, burning what they could not carry. Unofficial sources say that over 3,000 books and other materials were taken from the vault, most of them on highly technical subjects. The books have proved so significant that the public hailed Prince Hanse as the victor of Halstead Station. Capitalizing on this public admiration, he unveiled his plans for the creation of the New Avalon Institute of Science. Today, the Halstead collection is housed in the Nays in an environmentally controlled library. Researchers have not yet mined the full wealth of knowledge contained in the Holstead collection, but much of it is the basis for the NASA's ability to recover some lost knowledge and technology. Prince Hanse has made most of the information available for public use. Some of the material is even part of the university data service that anyone with a computer can access. This has made Prince Hanse seem to be a peaceful man who believes that everyone, even the lowliest citizen, deserves to reap the benefit of knowledge. Strategic moves. I'm still pretty young, but I've seen enough action to kill any heroic feelings I had toward combat and war. For me, knowing that I have to send men and women into combat is the dirtiest job I can think of. Prince Hanse Davion, 3023. Although the war with House Davion went on, Prince Hanse turned most of his attention to the Capellan situation in the early years of his reign. Things had already gone from bad to worse during his brother's reign, and so Hanse decided to follow up his earlier victory and right with a steady stream of new attacks to re-establish the Davion prestige in the region. He made several personal appearances on the front, but he had come mainly to study and observe the situation. One of Prince Hanse's most strategic moves was to enlarge the role of mercenary units in the IFs. Both his father and his brother had believed that mercenaries should never be given a chance to show initiative. As a result, they had rarely assigned mercenaries to raids or offensives that would have allowed them independent action. Hanse had his own opinions, however, realizing that mercenaries were the means to keep up pressure on the enemy without exhausting his own military. That meant allowing mercenary units to handle some of the highly mobile actions. His policy change showed immediate benefits. In 3014, 2 mercenary units, Kingston's Commandos, a Mech regiment, and Tristram's Terrorists, a mixed arms unit, attacked St. Ives in the Capellan Confederation. Contrary to what some Davion marshals had predicted, the 2 mercenary bands showed considerable intelligence and courage, which a pleased prince rewarded with large bonuses when the unit returned. These actions provoked a violent and unexpected reaction from Chancellor Maximilian Liao. In 3022, he unleashed Mechwarrion's armored cavalry, the Confederation's best mercenary unit, on the Federated Suns. What started out as a raid turned into a 3-year odyssey of destruction and pillage deep into the Federated Suns that has only just resolved itself. Despite the continued strength of the Capellan forces, the IFs must be well pleased with its standing in the Capellan March. The only cloud on the horizon is the fact of Duke Michael Hanse Davion's recent talks with Maximilian Liao. Whatever the Duke of New Certis has planned, it is unlikely that any plot short of all-out rebellion could shake Prince Davion's hold on the Federated Suns. As for the struggle against House Davion, Hanse Davion has made it known that he intends to win back the remaining Federated Suns worlds taken by the Draconis Combine during the First Succession War. This is a surprising boast from a prince known for his caution. Many feared that the prince would immediately launch a major campaign to win the worlds as quickly as possible. To the contrary, the character border seems to have settled down into yet another exchange of heavy raids. In the past 5 years, both sides have carried out a total of 20 raids. Some are worth noting, like the battle for Harrow's Son, the Davion raids against Dobson Onions, and the Battle of New Varson. Nevertheless, the border has changed little in the past decade, and Prince Hanse seems content to let it remain so. Future of the Federation. An alliance is a delicate thing, but I think ours will live beyond us. The day will come when our people will view our 2 states as a single realm with a single desire for peace. Toast made by Prince Hanse Davion to Archon Steiner, 3022. In 3020, Archon Steiner issued a peace proposal to the leaders of the other realms. Though her initiative was really nothing more than a ceasefire, it was the first time in decades that one of the successor states had made a bid for peace. All but one of the other successor lords viewed her offer with scorn, however. Like Katrina, Hanse Davion realized that the constant fighting was becoming an exercise in futility. Though forced to reject the conditions of the Archon's proposal, he could sense the sincerity behind the offer. Despite the objections raised by some of his closest advisors, the prince opened secret communications with the Lyran Commonwealth. His faith did not go unrewarded. The talks between the two realms uncovered considerable common interests and desires. Indeed, the exchange proved so successful that they quickly bloomed from discussions of armistice and economic treaties to earnest conferences on an alliance. The fruit of these many long hours, weeks, and months of meetings came in 3022, when the two leaders signed the Federated Commonwealth Alliance Document, or FC Document, on Terra. The effects of this treaty have already been felt. The most obvious advantage of the alliance is the flow of military intelligence between the UFs and Ulcath about their common enemy, the Draconis Combine. In 3022, using information given them by the Commonwealth, Prince Hanse unleashed the UFs in a major offensive against the Draconis Combine. The results were spectacular, as the UFs recaptured such worlds as Tancredi IV, Galatia III, and Rome. The Commonwealth has also benefited from the complete ouster of combined forces off Seven, Kars, and Port Mazibai. Another outcome of the treaty is less visible but potentially more important than the sharing of military information. The stimulation of trade between the two houses could revitalize the economy of the Federated Suns, which has suffered from an inability to exploit its strong resources. Allied with the Commonwealth, the economic and industrial giant of the inner sphere, the Federated Suns can look forward to an explosion of economic activity. Of course, this would all come to naught if the two ruling families could not get along. The Steiners and the Davions are both proud families, yet practical enough to know the importance of friendship. Members of both houses have visited one another's realm, and returned home pleased by what they saw and how they were treated. The most crucial clause of the Davions and Steiner alliance was the betrothal of Melissa Steiner, the Archon designate, to Prince Hanse. Though the two have met only a few times and both realize that the marriage is political, there is evidence of real attraction between Hanse and the beautiful young Melissa. What this marriage could mean to the inner sphere is the potential creation of a single power strong enough militarily, economically, and emotionally to dominate the rest of the Successor States. The closer relations between Davion and Steiner have given the Draconis Combine, the Capellan Confederation, and the Free Worlds League plenty to worry about. Our united Federated Suns and Lyran Commonwealth will make a fearsome combination. To combat this threat, the three other houses have signed the Concord of Cape Dean, allying them against Davion and Steiner. It remains to be seen whether the Concord will fast, as neither the leaders nor the people of these three realms trust one another.